family.
Yes, yes.
Walter unfortunately died last week, and so we had a Shiva service on Monday night, and I had 170 people to let in.
It is quite a business. Yes, I knew Walter Camerling, yes, and had great respect for him. A lovely.
Yes, I thought you would have known him. Yeah.
Yes, Holocaust. He was a kinder transport survivor, wasn't he?
He was. That's right.
Yes. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, it is 3 o'clock. I'm still admitting people at this moment, so forgive my attention being partly on admitting, and I'm also chairing this meeting. That's my delight this afternoon, and we're focusing on truth. Not the whole truth is the question. Well, as many of you will know, amongst the other things that I do, I've been a teacher in my time. And I remember some years ago now, it doesn't matter where it was, no names, no pack drill, a boy coming into class when I was collecting in books for check homework. And I said, "So where's your book?" And he looked at me and said, "Sir, my book has lost itself." And yes. And you can imagine, I thought to myself, well, that's an interesting variation on the truth, isn't it? There are so many takes on what is truth. You know, there's descriptive truth. Makes a difference, doesn't it? If we hear that there's fighting on the borderlines between one country and another, and I'm reporting it, do I describe the people who are fighting as terrorists? Well, that conjures up a picture. Or do I describe them as freedom fighters? So according to how I describe them, that changes the truth, in a sense, as to how they are perceived. So there's descriptive truth. There's what you might call factual, verifiable truth. Are there 2 people waiting outside or 4? Well, actually, I can go outside and check, can't I? I can go and count. As a Christian priest, and I've come straight from the crematorium today, so I'm dressed as a priest today, I think I'm more interested in what you might call truth as it relates to character. And I'm not uninterested in propositional truths or descriptive truths, but actually people who are honest and people who are authentic. That's what I'm particular. So God, as I read the Bible, is more interested in the truth of the heart than the truth of the head, I think. But you can disagree with me. I'm going to introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, to a really exciting panel that we have today. In no particular order, we have Rabbi Maurice Michaels from Bournemouth's Reform Synagogue, the Reverend Dr Gareth Sherwood, the Chief Executive Officer of Bournemouth's YMCA. We have Michael Apps. Mike is a BBC TV reporter, and he'll tell you more about his work. And I'm delighted that we have a senior man, Darren Slade, from Bournemouth Echo, and Darren will tell you about his job as well. Welcome to all of the panelists. And what we do, generally speaking, is we go first round the panel, and each panelist introduces himself and gives what you might call a first take on the subject, not the whole truth, truth-telling and communications. Let's begin in the opposite order, if we may, in which I introduced people just now. Darren, really delighted that you're with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself? You've been leading the news on the Echo in Bournemouth for many years now, and I've always enjoyed working with you. So it's great that you're here today. Would you like to introduce yourself and give a take, a 2 or 3 minute take, if you will, on this topic?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, my name is Darren Slade. I'm currently business editor at the Daily Echo in Bournemouth, but I've been with the Echo in the newspaper business for 30 years now, and which most of that time at the Echo. And I like to think that I have been telling the truth for 30 years. That's kind of been my mission, and that's what the job is all about. But not everybody sees it that way. And I'm sorry to say that I come to you as the representative of not a very trusted profession, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an annual report. Journalists are now only trusted by 45% of people, which is down 5% even on last year. One of the very first things journalists is that if you should ever find yourself on the wrong side of a defamation action, a libel action, the only defense you really want to be relying on is the defense of justification, which is defined as the words complained of are true in substance and fact. And so you really want to be telling the truth. Sometimes it's the truth that people don't want to hear. Sometimes it's the truth that people don't want to be known, but that should be what the job is all about. And I do see the job as a bit of a calling, really, not in a sort of as lofty as way as being a minister of religion, let's say, but as an important vocation. I would just say that what troubles me is the level of distrust, but also that if people feel they can't believe what they call the mainstream media, that they will too easily believe anything. And it is too easy to look at the world through the prism of our own opinions or our own prejudices and see only the things that conform with that. And I think we've seen some of that, for example, in the social media discussion of the COVID pandemic, and of course some of the worrying things that are going on in America. So these things trouble me. I do think that we all have a responsibility to look at the information that we share and the stories that we tell to each other, whatever we do for a living, and examine our own biases and our own points of view, because in the end, I suppose my ultimate opinion is that opinions are free and manifold, but facts and truth are in the end sacred.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you. Again, no particular order. Rabbi Maurice Michaels, there may well be some people present who didn't hear you introduce yourself last week. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself, much as Darren did, and give us your first take from your particular faith perspective, the Jewish faith, the Jewish faith.
Okay, I'm the rabbi at Bournemouth Reformed Synagogue. Before becoming a rabbi, I worked for a communications company. We designed and manufactured tools for communication. So telephone systems, landline and submarine cables, the ubiquitous mobile phone, although in those days it looked a bit like a house brick and weighed much more. As a rabbi, my primary role is as a communicator, whether it's to meet the spiritual, the intellectual, the emotional, or the social needs of my community, and indeed beyond. I'm required to communicate in speech or by the written word. So this topic is of great interest to me. I am by far the oldest of our speakers today. So if I can just sort of go back a little bit in time, I remember a time, you see, when truth used to be absolute, whereas now it seems to be relative. When facts were facts, and now they're opinions. When fake used to mean false, but now it means alternative. And if you put those together, the consequence is that lies are alternative facts. So how did that come about? I think there are many reasons for that. I'd like to concentrate just very quickly on three of them. The first is that I think we live in an egocentric environment. so much so that there are those who really believe that truth is what they say it is. Ian referred to the sort of the courts of law requiring more than the truth. It's the whole truth. But for these people, so long as there's a semblance of truth in it, that's enough. And the courts require you to have nothing but the truth, whereas it's almost become nothing like the truth. The second reason, I think, is because, and this comes to the second part of the theme, the communications bit, is that those traditional communicators are no longer regarded as credible. Those with authority to communicate are mistrusted. I think the thinking goes something like this. Politicians are in it just for themselves. The police and the judiciary are institutionally discriminatory. Experts are an elite, and that doesn't who don't understand the ordinary people. Teachers and lecturers are brainwashing their students according to their own agenda. Religion and clergy are corrupt, and we're likely to want to protect the perpetrators rather than support the victims. The BBC is no longer impartial, and it prioritizes young middle-class wakefulness. Newspapers are more interested in making news than reporting it. And unfortunately, there's sufficient element of truth in all of these that validates the whole and diminishes the ability, therefore, to communicate effectively. And the third thing is that Darren already touched on this, I think, that is that there is a non-traditional communications network which is burgeoned to fill the gap. Anyone can now be a communicator and so an influencer. There are no legal restrictions that apply in the way that it does for the traditional news sources. It's easier to choose what to read, who to follow, so that your own existing views and opinions are just reinforced. Also, there's a criminal element playing on the fears and suspicions of the more gullible, and in order to make money. Now, okay, and of course the owners of the servers, and we're seeing more and more of this, the owners of those servers are becoming censors of the materials without recourse to legal definitions. Now, I know I've been deliberately provocative, but I thought it might engender a little bit of discussion and participation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rabbi Maurice. That's fantastic. Michael Apps, would you like, Mike, to introduce yourself? Really delighted that you're with us, and give a take on where you are with truth-telling in your profession.
Thank you very much. So I'm Mike Apps. I've been a journalist and broadcaster for about 18 years now. I started out in commercial radio and I worked for a number of different stations across the country. And then I joined the BBC in about 2010, where I've worked first of all for BBC Radio Solent as then and newsroom, and I produced the breakfast show there for a number of years. And about 4 years ago, I moved across to television, where I've been working for BBC South Today since then as a reporter and journalist. Now, I've always believed that it's fundamental to the work that I do as a journalist that the news reports that I deliver should be fair, accurate, and balanced. Now, I absolutely have an opinion on every story that I report on, and I think it would be quite strange if I didn't. I think if you were so disengaged from what you were reporting on that you just tried to sort of remain detached from it, I think it would affect the quality of the report that you put together. But I think it's really important and an abiding principle that I work from, that the opinion that I have doesn't impact on the report that I ultimately deliver. I would always strive with what I put together to produce something where I present the facts in a balanced and palatable way, and I leave it to the discretion of the viewer to come to their own conclusion about whether they think something is particularly right or wrong as appropriate for that story. Now, I would say that in these extraordinary times, it has felt to me like, more so than ever before, I've really been conscious of what a privilege it is to do the job that I do, particularly through lockdown, at times when people have been shielding and unable to leave the house in many cases. I think more so than ever, the media has had a role to really provide literally a window to the outside world to help people stay connected when they'd be detached in other ways. And I've taken a real pride in being able to do it. And I think it's really made me feel re-energized, I think, about the importance of the role that the media has, and also, thinking with Darren here as well, the importance of local news, both in terms of what I do and print and online journalism, the important role that we have. But I think also, going back to something that's been touched upon, I would say that I've not known a time either where I've been so conscious of my profession being under attack from a number of different sources, where it does feel more so than ever before. It's always been there to some extent, but I think unquestionably it has grown considerably, this sense that at times the different parts of the media are being openly questioned, criticised, and in some cases accused of trying to mislead the public or indeed push a particular agenda. And I think I would say that I think it's absolutely right that we should be held to a high standard. I really welcome criticism. I'm always happy if I pick up the phone at work and receive feedback on something that I've done or one of my colleagues has done from a viewer where they want to challenge what we've done. That's absolutely fine in terms of accuracy, in terms of whether someone feels that what we did wasn't fair. That's absolutely fine. But obviously it is this growing sense that there's a proportion of society who group together this idea of mainstream media, put a blanket across it, and try to shout it down and say it can't be trusted. It's trying to peddle an agenda which they believe is not in everyone's best interests. And I, accept that is out there, but I would hope that we're in a period now that is not going to represent the way of the future, and we can actually move past this and people can become better informed and more fair in the way that they're able to disseminate the different sources of news and see them for what they are.
Thank you, Mike. That's fantastic. Thank you. Gareth, Dr. Gareth Sherwood, Chief Executive of the YMCA. What's your take on all this? Would you like to just introduce yourself again and give a take? And I know you're speaking particularly as a Christian minister.
Yeah. So this is interesting. If today you knew I was a Christian minister, you would hear the words I say in a particular way, coming from the assumptions that you have about my work as a Christian minister. If today I speak to you as the Chief Executive of the YMCA, you have assumptions about the way I'm saying things and my intentions because I'm speaking as a Chief Executive. If I speak to you today as a medical doctor, and my background as a medical doctor, you have assumptions and beliefs about why the reasons for me saying things because of who I am as a medical doctor. And so I have a rather interesting way of wearing many hats in many of these discussions, and to a degree playing with that when it comes to confidence in the author or the origin of where the truth is coming from. I can speak to you as a scientist, I can speak to you as a philosopher, I can speak to you as a minister and theologian, I can speak to you as a businessman, and there's the different frameworks of where these come from. And I think that's where, in the culture that we live in now, which is living in the era of postmodernism and beyond, where we have very much an understanding of truth is what you hear, not what I mean. And so you are interpreting what I really mean. And because the whole culture has been given reason to believe this or reason to think like this, it must mean it's extremely hard for journalists and for people who produce truth to properly get across the meaning of what they are intending to write, the meaning of what they're trying to communicate to a multitude of different audiences, many of whom are going to choose the truth that they want to read out of what you've said or what you've written, rather than what you actually meant in the first place. Extremely challenging. Add to that the mix of the redefinition of words that we're experiencing across a range of different areas within our culture. And suddenly words that we mean something by, somebody else hears something completely different. And it makes it extremely hard to understand what truth really is in the culture. And that for me then comes back to part of the introduction, which is, here I am a Christian minister. And for most of you in the culture that haven't been Christian ministers or ministers of a religion, you will have heard truth from politicians, or you would have heard truth from doctors, or you would have heard truth from other groups. Ministers generally over the last 20 or so years have not had a good experience of trying to input truth into a public sphere. And the reason for that is because generally speaking, theology and generally speaking, Christian opinion has been thought to have become from a biased perspective or a bad intention perspective or from a judgmental perspective because of the stigma that's attached to the origin of where it came from. So for me, I come at this from a very interesting angle, in that truth itself has, as Ian has pointed out, multiple different definitions these days. We seem to live in a world where subjective truth seems to be more important than objective truth. And by that, what I mean is people's opinions tend to be more important than some sort of shared corporate understanding of reality. And that leads to all sorts of problems, none more apparent at the moment than the anti-vax versus the vax group that are going on with COVID. And so bottling that back down to one story that I'll share, which illustrates some of the trauma of telling the truth. I remember back in my medical days, I had a patient who was dying of cancer. They had 5 days left to live, roughly. We're rotten guesses, but they had roughly 5 days left. And the guy had an element of confusion. And I remember finding the diagnosis. He was new in, it was just a late catch, and it was really traumatic. And I went in and told him the diagnosis, burst into tears, didn't want to see his family, didn't want to eat that day, just awful trauma to him, the truth. And so then what he did the next day when I came to see him and find out how he was getting on, he was happy away, and he said this to me. He says, Doc, what's wrong with me? Do you not remember the discussion I had yesterday? Do you not remember what we talked about? No. Am I going home soon? I'll be fine when I... And so I remember going back through the process and saying, well, yesterday I sat you down and we talked about why you came into hospital, and this is the diagnosis and everything else. Floods of tears, didn't want to eat, didn't want to see his family, didn't want anything to do with anything, shut down for the entire day. Next morning came round, how you doing? Hi, Doc, nice to see you. When am I going home? I'm fine, aren't I? What do you do? So I remember weighing it up in my mind and thinking, I don't know, he's got a few days left to live. Maybe I'll give it one more shot. Same thing happened again. So the next day, this is the 4th day now. And he said, when am I going home? I said, you'll be here a few days. Do you want to see your family? And I chose to lie to him. I chose to not tell him the truth. And that, in some senses, took away his freedom. It took away his choices. But in his mind, he had made up that he didn't want to know even if he wanted to know. And so he then spent 2 days with his family before he passed away. And to this day, I wonder, did I make the right decision? Should I have told him again? But sometimes the truth can be so harmful, and we've got to be so careful with the truth. And so one of the great sages of our day, Dumbledore, once said, the truth, it's a beautiful and a terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution. And I think those lines that are said in the words of Harry Potter actually summarize some of the difficulties that we have with the truth. The truth is something very precious, very important, would bring freedom and liberty and understanding and a shared community. It's so important in honesty and relationships, so important in the way we interact with one another, but it also can be incredibly harmful and incredibly damaging. And therefore, one of the great challenges of those that tell the truth is to tell the truth in such a way that it liberates people and gives people the freedom that they need and the information that they need, but at the same time isn't used to damage, to harm, or to create division and trouble. Bless you.
Really helpful. And what you brought to mind with me, Gareth, is that balance that I've often tried to hold and rarely succeeded. I think few of us succeed, the balance between truth and love. And I remember hearing somebody say in a catchphrase thing that there's always a risk that love without truth can be just mawkish and sentimental. It needs truth to ground it. in the sometimes often hard realities of life. Whereas on the other hand, truth without love can be harsh, I remember as a young teacher, an older teacher who'd been observing my really rather poor standard teaching, saying, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. And I can still feel the pain of the brutality of his honesty, you know? So trying to balance truth and love. And I remember you saying earlier, Gareth, about us about subjective and objective. And Mike, you were saying that you have an opinion. Of course you do. Now, so part of the honesty, I've often reckoned, is you declare your opinion. Who'd like to take these things further? We've got, I think what I'm going to do now is open it up so that a panel member can jump in if he wants to, but also anyone from the audience can jump in as well, because we've had some really good introductions there. Who would like to? Now, I can't see you waving. I don't think, wait a moment, let's see if I can. Ah, yes. Anybody? Sue.
I'll start off. I was interested in what Mike was saying. That he didn't allow his personal opinion to alter how he reported the news. I think one of the main complaints lately about TV news, particularly BBC, it's in practically every paper that you read, is the fact that there are particular reporters who have already made up their mind before they start reporting on interviews or whatever they're reporting. Can you give me his aspect on that and how he feels about that? Because I think that in itself is bringing down the reputation of reporters themselves.
Mike, one for you. And then Darren, I think we'll come on to you next, if we may.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's really difficult, as I sort of said before, you have to, I would say, look at specific instances, and I'd have to sort of see a particular report. If there was a feeling that there was a bias in that, I'd need to look at it and judge on its own merits. I think that a relevant example would be, I mentioned before about often people will ring our newsroom to comment on something they've seen. And there was a particular case earlier this summer where, well, last summer just gone, you remember when the statue of Coulston was removed from Bristol. And we ran a report because we were notified that the statue of Baden-Powell at Poole Quay was on a list nationally as being regarded as being sensitive and a potential target for people who were wanting it to be removed, and also a potential target for people who felt strongly that it should remain where it is. So the story we presented was that it was being guarded by the council while they took a decision on whether or not to remove it. So we ran a report on that on our programme, and 10 minutes into the programme, after the report had gone out, I picked up the phone and I took one of the angriest phone calls I've ever had from someone who felt absolutely passionately that the report had been biased towards the movement that says this statue should be removed, and it wasn't a balanced report, and the way we put it together hadn't met that standard. I spoke to the person, listened to their point of view, put the phone down, and then 5 minutes later I took another phone call from someone who rang in to complain with the complete opposite take on what they'd seen, where they felt we had been far too generous to people who'd wanted the statue to be removed, and just a completely different take on the same report. For what it's worth, when I watched the report, I'm not just saying this because it was produced by one of my colleagues, I felt that they put together something that was balanced and presented the facts in that way. So I do think that, you know, going back to what I said about we all have an opinion, I think we all have an opinion when we view a particular report, and it is possible to interpret what we see subjectively and often see things ourselves, interpret it in a way that others wouldn't interpret it. But to go back to your initial point, I do still agree that it is important. By what I said, we should be held to a high standard of producing news reports which aren't trying to push a particular opinion at the viewer or the reader. And I absolutely.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike. Darren, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I think I would just say this question of bias. It's not. It's a complicated topic. I mean, first of all, who would want to be someone like the BBC's political editor Laura Kuenssberg, and the abuse that she gets on social media from people who think she's left-wing, people who think she's right-wing, people who say, I saw a teacher telling her that she votes Conservative, and I'm thinking, unless you followed Laura Kuenssberg into the polling booth, you can't possibly know that. And I hope you would expect your pupils to show a higher standard of evidence in an argument than you have. But I mean, all I would say is that, yes, we have opinions. We even have opinions on political things and so on. But we are trained to kind of keep those out. And the idea that is kind of abroad in the sort of culture that journalists have a point of view and try and push that all the time is so far from almost every journalist that I've known. Apart from anything else, one's views change. And you don't necessarily feel the same way about things as a trainee in your 20s as you do as a mature journalist years later. And I suspect most journalists have had the experience where they actually get on rather well with people whose views they don't like, and sometimes they struggle to get along with someone whose views they actually agree with. So these things are not simple. I know it seems like a kind of cop-out to say we get as many complaints from this point of view as we do from that point of view, but that really does tend to be true. So I think we keep our own opinions in check as far as we can. If people didn't feel they got a fair shake of the stick, I would be very happy to always discuss that. But I think it is, particularly in the world of social media, I think there is a tendency to think anything that brings you news or brings you a point of view that you don't agree with is biased, and increasingly there is this call, you must call out this politician because they're a liar and things like that, and that problem has been exacerbated, I suppose, by President Trump, who would clearly say things that were provably untrue in front of a global audience. But the idea that we should be telling politicians that they're lying, they rarely are. They may distort or spin or do other kinds of things, but a bold, barefaced lie doesn't often happen. So it's a complicated area, and I suppose all I can really do is assure you of the good intentions of almost every journalist I've ever met.
And of almost every cleric, male and female, that I've ever met. I mean, of course I'm biased, I say. I'm a Christian minister, so I believe in God, and I believe God's truth is shown in Jesus. However, as I said, when I was chairing a couple of Wednesdays ago, there are very, very many different ways of understanding Jesus of Nazareth. There are very, very many different positions that his church holds. So having declared my bias doesn't necessarily link me to one particular view. In my case, I'm also an academic researcher, and I believe in, as objectively as I can, getting a range of opinions. Gareth, would you like to come back on this one? And then Rabbi Maurice, I'll invite you back in as well.
I think for me, I actually quite enjoy reading the press, and even within the press, because we have so many journalists these days putting all sorts of stuff out there in the interweb. I tend to find that even if journalists express an opinion in the midst of that, because we have an array of opinions even within journalism, you tend to be able to filter out the truth within that and get to the facts as best you can. But here's the caveat. I've been trained to do that. I was trained to do that in medicine, where we were reading different journals, different studies, and to dig through the weeds to find the kind of the gold in there. And I think the challenge of the times that we live in is that all too often now people are looking for opinions they agree with, rather than looking for understanding. And I think we live in quite difficult times, and it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about last week about respect for the institution itself, and honouring those who have taken responsibility and accountability positions and hold themselves to a series of guidelines. And I think as been mentioned by Darren, I don't think Donald Trump has really helped matters by putting himself as the only authority and discrediting all others. And I think we are living in a difficult season in our culture's history of the respect for the institution, and therefore respect for those that represent the institution in a formal way. So the official press versus the unofficial press. And there is an element of the unofficial press is somehow given more credibility than those that have chosen a very professional and accountable line of delivering journalistic news stories and newsworthy reports. So all I can do is express an opinion to say that I try and read a number of different reports, and I get a lot of wealth out of it and appreciate the diligence that's put in. But that's only because I've been trained to do that, and not everybody has.
Thanks, Gareth. Rabbi Maurice.
I think part of our problem is the fact that society as a whole is so divided, and therefore, if you say something that I agree with, it's right, it's truth, that's gospel. And if you say something I disagree with, then clearly you must be telling an untruth, because it's not the way I understand it, it's not the way I see it. And that's the problem, I think, that we're seeing more and more of as a result of this increasing division in society as a whole. However much we want to be objective, we are nevertheless going to be constrained by the subjectivity of our background, our upbringing, the schools we go to, the organizations we belong to, the communities we pray in or don't pray in. All of those things are inevitably going to impinge on us and the way in which we think. And therefore, there's a subconscious bias. I don't think it's a conscious bias, but I believe that there is a subconscious bias which does exist in every single one of us, not just in reporters and journalists. I know that when, as much as I want to try to give both sides of a picture, when I'm preparing a thought for my congregation or a sermon or whatever it is, there will be something of me in it. There has to be, and it incorporates me as the person that I am, the experiences that I've had, the places I've lived, and so on. So that with the best will in the world, to think in terms of being totally impartial, totally unbiased, is really an impossibility.
Anybody like to come in from the audience? Now, wave your hand about or unmute yourself and speak. I can see half a dozen people at a time. Isn't as
there's John and there's Virginia.
Oh, thank you, Maurice. That's great. So let's do it in that order that you named them. John Staples is that first, and then Virginia Beck, and then anyone else after that.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I unmute? Yes. What I was going to say was, it depends a great deal, I think, where the light of truth is shining. If it's shining on other people, it's much more acceptable. If it's shining on you, you feel very vulnerable. That I was very interested in Gareth's recounting the experience of people with a terminal illness. I've been around long enough to remember when doctors wouldn't tell you if you had a terminal illness. And I remember facing a doctor up with it on one occasion and saying, why on earth won't you tell them when they ask you? And he said, well, because when I did, that person totally collapsed, and I had to look after them until their dying day. And it was an absolute nightmare. So I swore I would never tell anybody again. Then there came the time when patients got what I used to call the bloody shovel treatment, when they were told in no uncertain terms exactly what was wrong with them, and that they were jolly well going to die, and they better face it now. I think now we have got to a much more nuanced situation where doctors are would look much more carefully at their patients as to what truth they can take and what they can't. I've known a lot of people who've died of a terminal illness who said they didn't want to know and resisted any telling of the truth to them, and they died. That was their way of coping until they died. And I think we should respect them for that when that is the case, though some people ask and really want to know the answer. When you tell people to repent, that is a very challenging thing to do. Some people can take it, but a lot can't.
Sounds like one for you, Gareth, on the medical level at least.
Yeah, I once had a consultant who, we had a patient and they had the cancer removed. We took them in for an operation. They had a cancer removed in the operation, but it was spread throughout the body. So it was a terminal diagnosis. And we came out of the operating theatre and we were accosted by about 20 family members outside the operating theatre. Patient didn't know what was wrong with them yet. And the family members were all, what's going on? What's going on? And so we took them to the side. My consultant told them what was going on. And then a little later on, back on the hospital ward, patient's being brought around from surgery. The next morning, I sat down with them. I let them know the diagnosis. And they said, the first thing they said to me is, please don't tell my family. And I think my best response is that the way that you manage truth and try not to do harm, whatever you do, you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
You're choosing a paternalistic approach. There's and you will end up apologizing down the line. And I think what's important, and this is where levels of grace need to be extended within our community. And I think to a degree as a culture, we've lost the ability to do this, to forgive. And I think towards journalists, coming back to that group, we need to understand they're going to make mistakes. Yeah. And in making a mistake, they don't have bad intentions and they really meant to deceive and they meant to do all of these things in the same way that doctors that make mistakes in telling the truth haven't meant to do any harm. And what I've found over the years practicing in medicine is I was fortunate enough to have very gracious patients that when you did make a mistake, they were very gracious in the way we looked after one another. And I think if we can get to a point in our culture where we're able to extend one another grace and forgiveness and mercy, I think it'll be a lot easier to handle the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wonder if I can come in, Ian, because I'd like to read an email that I received 2 days ago from one of my congregants. It says, "Dear Rabbi, we heard from the coroner that my father-in-law died from acute cardiac failure. The coroner told them that he died peacefully in his sleep. This was a lie in order to spare their feelings. As an ex-nurse, I know it's a lie. Is it okay for me to keep this knowledge of a lie to myself? What good would it do them if they knew what really happened? Do I have to tell them, sorry, but the coroner lied? He died conscious, in pain, and on his own. I can't see what good that would do. I need some advice on this one. Do I have to tell them the truth, or can I spare their feelings?" So it's not just doctors who have this problem, and I guess you won't be surprised to know that that I told her absolutely you spare their feelings because it's all gone, it's past, and there's absolutely nothing, no good. There's no positive reason for telling them. There's lots of positive reasons for not telling them. So. So we do have that, and we do have to recognise that. I think, as you started off with there are truths and there are truths.
Thank you, Maurice. Virginia, you've been waiting to ask a question for this.
Yes. I feel that diplomacy has been a bit lost in this day and age. And also, I wanted to put to Mike and Darren that there was a time when the pen was mightier than the word. But with today's television and interviews face to face, I often wonder about that, and I wondered what their opinion is of it.
Who's going to go first, Mike or Darren?
I'm happy to pitch it if that helps. I mean, I think, yes, in answer to that one, I suppose. I don't know whether Mike feels the same way, but I'm kind of feeling like social media is the most powerful form of the written word or of the kind of videoed word of all, because I see that taking off, and sometimes out of all proportion. I see exaggerations or just falsehoods being widely shared by people often who don't mean to share a lie exactly, but have just let something chime with their prejudices and think it must be correct. So that, I think, troubles me more than ever, and it is very difficult. To take one random example, a little while ago, there was a suggestion that NHS staff at Bournemouth were getting parking tickets put on their cars while they were treating COVID patients, which was not, I think, we established, true. But it had taken off on such a momentum on social media that people were coming to us and saying, "Why aren't you reporting this?" And we had to say, because we're checking whether it's true. And that sort of thing bothers me, because I think, and if you look at the number of people who follow anybody that you see making some outrageous claim on social media, you will often find they've got a bigger following than someone who is more cautious, and that troubles me. So I think that may be the most powerful communication tool of all at the moment.
Knee-jerk cyber reactions can be very worrying. A few years ago, I was chaplain at a school in Canterbury, and on my first day as chaplain, a young lady was being cyber bullied. She was with somebody else's boyfriend, and her supposed friends, Facebook friends, WhatsApp friends, whoever, cascaded her in a way that left her feeling suicidal, because she just has such a cascade of digital hate mail. And I know Twitter at the moment can be very toxic. Anyway, that was just something that resonated with me. Mike, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely echo what Darren says there. It is really worrying, a lot of what we see from social media in that respect, the way things take on a momentum of their own, and people who don't necessarily have to have any qualification to share their opinion, other than the fact they've got a mobile phone, are given greater prominence than ever before. I have to be honest and say that unquestionably, as a journalist, I see the benefits of it as well. Right now in this particular lockdown, whereas in the early parts of last year when we had other lockdowns, as a reporter, I was able to travel around to report a lot more as a key worker. As an organisation, the BBC is really trying to limit movement of reporters much more now, and so we're far more reliant on doing things remotely and doing interviews over Zoom. And so therefore, I can think of an example just this week, a report that I'm working on for Friday's programme. I've got two really terrific case studies who I have found through social media, and that is simply through going to a particular Facebook group and asking them to ask if their members could share their experience with me, and I found them who I wouldn't have found any other way, particularly now through doing that. So I can absolutely see the benefits of it, and there is something very positive about the democratization of the media, if you like, from the fact that people now have a voice more so than ever before because of these new platforms. But clearly there is real concern and caution with the kind of prominence it allows some opinions to have.
Virginia, did you want to come back?
Not really, but it just proves to me that it's an old-fashioned saying now that the pen is mightier than the word.
Anyone else want to come in there?
I have a great difficulty, Mike, with the democratization that comes from the social media, when the people who run the servers can, without fear of any sort of reaction response, decide who and who can't be on it, can decide what they can and what they can't say, and this is it gives them. And they're not accountable in any way. They don't have to follow any sort of laws and regulations that the traditional media have to. Whilst democratization in one regard, it's a very, very anti-democratic in another.
Absolutely. Yes, Twitter, Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, and between them they kicked out Parler, didn't they? We've got...
Not a lot's changed, though, Ian. I mean, was it Mark Twain said that a lie will travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its boots on? Mm. And, there is an element of, not a lot's changed under the sun. The medium's changed, but it's still the same what things we're dealing with.
And I come back to where I was at the beginning, that whilst there is descriptive truth and there's truth that you can identify, I'm particularly interested in truth in character and truth in a person. Honesty, authenticity, linked to generosity, graciousness, forgiveness, as you were saying, Gareth. Justice, yes. We've got about 7 minutes to go. We could take another question from the audience before I ask panel members to sum up from their perspective. That's Don Gobbett, first of all, and then Father Andrew.
I think actually Father Andrew had his hand up before I did, so...
That's kind of you. Thanks, Don. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. I did just want, while we've still got time, to hear the journalists deal with Rabbi Maurice's admittedly provocative criticism. Do you think the mainstream media has any responsibility to bear for the loss of confidence in it?
Mike or Darren, who's going first?
Happy to, or did you want to leap in, Mike? You did. I did first last time.
Means.
Sorry. Shall I go first? I mean, I think I wouldn't want to sound like I was suggesting everything was perfect in the in the media. I think there certainly are many challenges to truth telling, and sometimes not inaccurate, but sometimes a story is not perfect for a whole lot of reasons. One of the dangers is the pressure to get things out quickly and to be first. And I think it's really important that sometimes we say to ourselves, particularly when we're publishing online, well, hang on, let's, at the risk of not being first with it, just let's make sure it's correct. I'm always struck by the fact that, do you remember that famous clip of Walter Cronkite confirming that President Kennedy had died? And it's a very famous clip where he takes off his glasses and kind of rubs his eye and so on. And everybody thinks that he was the first person to say it, but he wasn't. Actually, they were quite late saying it, because he said, if it's CBS or whatever, we want to make sure that we're correct. And so they were one of the last to report it, but they made sure they were 100% right when they did. So I do think, yeah, the pressure to be first can be a problem. The sort of pack mentality, or the sense that a story is taking off and you want to have that story can be a risk. And just human fallibility can be a risk. And one we haven't really touched on is, when I look back now to some of the scientific debates that mainstream media have reported, I think there has been a problem when people have reported things like climate change or the previous vaccination controversies and tried to treat them as though they were, or fell into the habit of treating them as though they were kind of 2 points of view that were of equal weight. That is a challenge. You really sometimes need to respect that not everything is like politics. They're not necessarily two equally valid points of view. So just a few thoughts off the top of my head on that subject.
Thanks, Darren. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely agree. I think there's a lot to be said there, as far as we all start, or I hope we'd all start with the best of intentions as journalists, and that's the crucial thing. But it's not always going to be right. I mean, I can think of a report I did earlier this year where, as is the norm, one of my colleagues watched it through before it was broadcast and said, "Oh, do you want to just change the last line there, because it sounds like it could be seen as being slanted to a particular way." So, that was an important filter to put it through. I think, sort of going back to, I think, a point that Rabbi Maurice made earlier in terms of the sharing of the truth and whether it's always the right thing to do. I mean, I think something that's been a comment I've heard quite a lot from people this year is because of the fact that the news is so oppressive on a daily basis with the figures that we have to deal with COVID. Some would say, "I don't want to hear it. I reached the point I don't want to hear the same thing every day," whereas others would say, I saw someone tweeted the other day to say 1,200 people died from COVID-19 today, and I think it was the 5th story in that night's TV news bulletin. I think even not how we report the news, but the story we choose to report has a degree of personal view that comes with them in terms of what we see as being important. But I think overall, I would say quite simply that all one can do as a journalist is start with the best of intentions, take in other people's opinions, and if you listen to them, then you can do the best that you can to be as lacking in bias as possible.
Really helpful, thank you. Don, we're in our last few moments before the sum up, but did you want to ask a quick question, Don?
It was more an observation. I listened to a very excellent lecture a few months ago from Gresham College on the topic of populism. And it sort of drew a few of these strands together for me, because the lecturer defined populism with different characteristics, 3 of which were, one, it discredits the media, and we've talked about that, and then obviously then relies on as it were, the non-mainstream media. Secondly, it belittles experts, so their view is discredited, and I am hearing MPs and senior MPs, ministers, doing that now, and it appeals to the people. I represent the people when I have no mandate to do so, and the professor doing this said it's a very dangerous path and enemy of democracy. So what we've talked about is interesting we've talked about fairly local level, I guess, but sometimes we need to stand back and with the big picture and just think, what is going on here overall? Is this a threat to the system under which we live, the freedom under which we live? And be very careful, because populism's happened before. It happened in Germany in the 1930s, and we know where that ended up. So sorry, it's more of a comment.
Helpful. We're now in our last few minutes, so we're at the point at which I'm going to ask panel members if they would care to sum up in a nutshell what they've gained and the questions that we want to take, that they particularly want to take further from today's, I found, really helpful discussion. Rabbi Maurice, I know you have to go dot on 4 o'clock, and that's in about 2 minutes' time. Would you like to begin by summing up?
I found this afternoon quite fascinating. It was wonderful to hear the views and opinions of the other panelists. And yes, I have learned from them particularly. But I think the comment that Don made right at the very end about populism and it suggests that this is something which is just one element within a much broader topic. And a much larger potential crisis. I think that the UK, for all its faults, is one of those countries where populism won't succeed because we're far too pragmatic as a people generally to allow it to. But having said that, you know, it's a problem that goes on all around because we live in a global world nowadays. You know, it's a global market we're in. It's no longer just, we might be on an island, you know, geographically and physically, but we're not an island race any longer in terms of the bigger world.
Thank you very much. And I know you will have to quietly slip out of this.
Thank you.
This virtual room, as it were. Really grateful to you, Maurice, for all that you've contributed today.
Thank
and
you.
We're looking forward to you being with us in the future as well.
Next week, Ian, you can't get rid of me. That's the trouble.
Couldn't possibly want to.
Right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, Maurice. God. Michael, over to you.
Well, I've really enjoyed taking part today as well and hearing what everyone has had to say. And I think the sense that I get from talking like this is that, you know, I don't consider that I've had a particularly long career, but in some respects I've been doing the job that I've been doing for a while. And I feel that in the time that I've been doing it, the media has changed quite dramatically over just that period. So I suspect there's a lot more change to come. And if we sat down and did this debate in 10 or 15 years time, we'll be talking about a very different media again to what we have right now. All I can say is that, you know, we can't fight that change. It's going to happen, and ultimately, you know, we need to embrace it, and no problem with that at all. But I just hope that in the future, there's a future for, or there will always be a future for media where the people who are giving us the news are professionals who are held to professional standards, and it's not a case of simply the people who shout the loudest who are allowed to dominate the agenda that the public receive.
Really helpful, Mike. Thank you. Darren.
Yeah, I suppose I was interested by what you said, Ian, about us all being sort of personally truthful. And I think in a world where everybody can be a publisher, because we can all have Facebook or Twitter or whatever other social media platform, and can get some traction for extreme and untrue statements, then we're all going to have to learn to be responsible and cautious, and maybe to see other people's point of view, and to be honest and try and understand each other a bit. So I suppose that's my takeaway, really, is that maybe we're all going to have to conduct ourselves to our own highest standards.
That's helpful. I'm so grateful to you also for, you know, blocking out the time to be with us this afternoon, Darren.
Really
very much appreciated. Gareth, from you, a summing up.
Darren said something really interesting in one of his throwaway lines. He said, "The truth is sacred." Yeah. And that phrase, sacred, bridges worlds for me personally. When we think about the truth and truth telling, it is a personal responsibility, but it's also something that we corporately must treasure and must shelter and look after. When I think of the biblical narrative, it's a pity Maurice is gone, because I think he would have been interested in the narrative of the false prophets. There's a phrase that's used when the false prophets are described in the Old Testament, and they're described as those that tickle the ears of their hearers with their words. And there's something about the danger of becoming those that speak in order to tickle the ears of those that listen, rather than to present the truth in its fashion that it needs to be presented. Because of the bigger picture of the impact of truth and the loss of it on a culture and a community. And I think we all lose something when truth is lost in a culture, or when truth is not shown. And we all gain when truth is known and respected and honored in a culture. And there's something empowering about the truth. So when I think about it from a personal perspective, I think of the responsibility. When I think about it from a corporate perspective, I think of the responsibility to do no harm, but also the responsibility to empower and enable those around me, and the responsibility to share truth. And then when I think about it in a spiritual perspective, that there is a sacredness to truth, and there is an ability to profane truth, which is something we need to guard ourselves against. Truth in philosophy, truth in medicine, truth in science, truth in spiritual development and our spiritual lives. And so for me, for today, I just think I've gained a lot from today, just hearing the way that our two journalist friends have spoken about truth and the responsibility that they have towards it. And it's reminded me of the integrity of journalists. It's reminded me of the seriousness by which they take their profession. And it's the sort of thing that I wish was heard more, because I think the respect for journalists would go up, not down, if they were to hear two of the colleagues, like the colleagues we've seen today, talking about their profession and the importance by which they take their storytelling and news reporting. Bless you.
And I would echo what Gareth has said there. Darren and Mike, so grateful to you.
Thank you.
We, no, we were just saying it as we find it. No, it's your presence, yours and Mike's here today has been something precious for us. Thank you. To me, part of what comes out of scripture as sacred is, for me, the truth of human worth. I find it like Brighton Rock, or perhaps I should say Bournemouth Rock, shouldn't I? Human worth is the sacred thing that I find writ large through scripture. And we're coming at ethics from that angle next week, February the 10th. Today's February the 10th. Get your act together, Terry. February the 17th. Does the wage show the worth? You remember the nasty old cliche, if you only pay peanuts, you must expect monkeys, you know. Is that true? You know, is it true that those who are paid exalted salaries must be worth the most? And that's what we're looking at next Wednesday. When I went through the titles of these forums with our Chief Executive of Council, Graham Farrant, he said, oh, well, everybody knows my salary is an exalted salary and what it is in the public domain. So I'll chair this one next week. So all being well, Chief Executive Graham Farrant will be chairing this next week. And he, along with an excellent range of panelists, will be up for questions on, does the wage show the worth? Why is there the vast chasm between least and best paid workers? How should we value different types of jobs and occupations? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really grateful, first of all, to our four panelists, to Gareth, Rabbi Maurice, to Darren, and to Mike, but to all of you, those of you who raised questions, those of you who were there and taking part, although you didn't get a chance to say something today. All being well, let's see you again, let's see each other again, 3 o'clock next Wednesday for Ethics Forums. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and goodbye for now. Thank you.